Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ashley Jackson. I'm the Director of Membership Marketing here at the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association. Before we get started today, I wanted to remind everybody that this webinar will be recorded and we'll be sharing it later this afternoon on the FRLA YouTube page, and it will be emailed to all registered attendees as well. I really want to encourage you to ask questions. I think we have a smaller group today, so please ask questions and we'll get to those throughout and at the end of the webinar as well. Before we get started, I want to introduce us to our speaker today, Al Saikali, Chair, Privacy and Data Security Practice. So with that, I'm going to kick it to you, Al.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Hi, everybody. As Ashley said, my name's Al Saikali, and I chair the Privacy and Data Security Practice at the law firm of Shakardi & Bacon. I'm an attorney. 100% of my practice is devoted to helping companies comply with laws that govern the collection and use of personal information. Oftentimes, those include data breaches and the legal requirements that flow from data breaches. I've been in this area of practice now for over a decade. We've handled, I think, over 1,400 different cybersecurity incidents for clients and advised them, directed forensic investigations as part of that. So what I'm about to tell you today is drawn from that experience with those cases. Specifically, we've handled over 100 ransomware events. So a lot of what I'm drawing from is taken from that experience. We've got a pretty small group, so please, I appreciate that you took the time to attend this session. So please feel free to submit a question, put anything in the chat. I'm happy to address those as I'm working through this presentation. So why don't we just kind of get started with question number one, or the first part of this, which is, what is ransomware, right? We keep hearing about ransomware, and it's a huge threat, right? You can't pick up a newspaper or watch the news these days without hearing something about a company getting attacked by ransomware. Ransomware, here are the different pieces of a ransomware threat. First, you have to have a threat actor. Whenever you hear the word threat actor, it's a fancy word for saying the bad guy, right? So you've got a bad guy. Now, with ransomware, it may be an organization that's a bad guy, not always, but 9 times out of 10 located overseas, oftentimes in Eastern Europe. But it can also be an individual, because there's something called ransomware as a service. Ransomware as a service is basically where these organizations, bad guys, criminal elements, sell the tools that you or I could use to engage in a ransomware attack against somebody else. Now, it's not, you can't go to Amazon.com and get it, but these tools are sold. They're files, codes, things like that. They're sold on the dark web, which again is not something that you could use your internet browser and just surf to. You have to download a special kind of browser in order to have access to that. But people pay these organizations a certain amount of money, and then the organizations provide them with these tools, and then the individuals can engage in these attacks. So threat actors are these organizations and individuals who are engaging in this sort of conduct. Then you have the exploitation of an existing vulnerability to perform reconnaissance. Okay, so I know there's a lot built in there, but ransomware attack it's not like somebody clicks on something and then all of a sudden everything locks up. That's not what happens. Ransomware, there are 2 phases to a ransomware attack, and oftentimes, and to many cybersecurity attacks. Phase 1 is getting your foot in the door of the company. Once you have your foot in the door of the company, then you can start poking around, seeing where the information is, what's vulnerable, and ultimately planting the ransomware bomb that will detonate as you're leaving, right? But you first have to figure out what's the vulnerability that gets your foot in the door. A vulnerability, like the analogy I like to use to describe a vulnerability is like when you leave the house, but you leave your door unlocked or a window unlocked or open. That's a vulnerability. That's a way for someone to get into your house. Doesn't mean somebody's going to actually get into your house, i.e. exploit the vulnerability, but it is a way, it's a vulnerability for you, right? But with ransomware, you have someone who's exploited that vulnerability. They've identified your vulnerability, and they're in there and now performing reconnaissance to figure out your environment, figure out how they're going to launch this ransomware attack, and oftentimes stealing information from you, taking copies of information from you as part of this reconnaissance. So then the third piece is then the encryption and or stealing of information. Encryption means that you're not able to access it. They basically lock up the file. So if you were to try to access it, you can't. It's encrypted. It's locked. It's still there, but it's locked. And the only way you can unlock it is by getting a decryption key. And that's where the ransom comes in, right? They say to you, if you want a decryption key to unlock your data, you're going to have to pay me an amount of money. But ransomware now increasingly is involving theft of information as well. And the reason that's important is because the bad guys will steal your data and then say to you, unless you pay me X amount of money, I will distribute this data that I've stolen out on the dark web. I'll sell it to people. It will be available to the public, and all your sensitive business information, your customers' information, all of that's going to be out there for the world to see, unless you pay me this ransom. So there are two ways that the ransomware comes into effect, right? Like you may have to pay a ransom for a decryption key, or you may have to pay a ransom for to prevent the further distribution of the data. We'll get into later, like what's the likelihood that if you pay these guys, they're actually going to do what they're going to do, what they promise to do. Then this has to be of sensitive information, right? Because you don't really care if they're encrypting stuff that you don't need or it's not sensitive to the business. They have no leverage to make you pay a ransom. So it has to be of sensitive information. And then they're requiring payment for the decryption key or a promise not to distribute the data further. So these are all of the elements of ransomware. That's what you can expect if you suffer a ransomware attack. We are increasingly seeing ransomware on the rise. It's not slowing down. As I said, you're seeing it all over the news. There are two slides here I want to show you with some statistics. On this slide, you see different trends. There are some takeaways, right? You can definitely see, for example, that the United States is the #1 target of ransomware attacks. Just increasingly that's the case. You also see that, by industry, we're seeing a lot of attacks against, certain types of companies in the technology industry, for example, services industry are all being targeted. But look at the little graph in the lower left corner that relates to exfiltration. Increasingly, we're seeing ransomware involving exfiltration and not just the encryption of data. We're also seeing that the amount of these ransom payouts are going up and up and up. So these are all things that I think trends to watch in this space. Here, what we see is that are the ways in which the bad guys get into your organization. Look on the left, you see sort of that just increasing the increasing amount of ransom someone will have to pay. And we've been seeing it, typically the threat actors begin with a demand of $1 million, $5 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. And you often negotiate with them and they bring it down. Sometimes they bring it down by 10%, sometimes they bring it down by 90%, just depending on the organization that's involved. And then on the right, what you see are the ways in which the bad guys are getting into your system to begin with, right? Like what's the vulnerability in your system that's causing this to happen? And so, you see #1 is RDP compromise, right? This is remote desktop protocol. Remote desktop protocol is, when you basically log into work, you're logging in, remotely, you're using certain type of software or a certain way to do that. These bad guys have figured out a way they've obtained your credentials and they're misusing your ability to use that remote access. They are using your own remote access in order for them to get access to it. So compromised credentials are often a big reason for this. #2 is email phishing, right? So email phishing, and Ashley, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know if there's somebody that with their mics on, but with email phishing, what we're noticing is that, you click on a link that's in an email and you've now downloaded malware. That's what gives the threat actor their initial foothold into your organization. And I had a case recently where we had a young lady who worked for a pharmaceutical company. She was taking a lunch break. She visited a newspaper, one of the local newspapers websites. There was a pop-up that said, in order for you to view this site, you need to download a latest version of your browser. Click here. She clicked on it. In fact, what she clicked on was malware. That let the bad guys get into her endpoint, her computer, and then using that, ultimately moving around to explore and then release the ransomware attack. That ransomware brought down the pharmaceutical company for a couple of weeks. So it's a really big deal. Email phishing, it's, and I'm putting myself in the shoes of you guys as entities in the restaurant and lodging sector. You want to make sure that any of your employees who have access to email are constantly being tested on phishing. And the way you do that, there are services out there, they're not that expensive, and they essentially will send fake emails to your employees to see if the employees will click on the link. If they click on the link, then you know they are individuals who need to have more training and potentially some disciplinary measures because they are a significant risk to your organization from a perspective. The third way where we're seeing the threat actors getting in is by software vulnerabilities. So if you use think of any application that your organization uses, over time, there can be vulnerabilities with that application. Usually the application developers will send you a bulletin, an email, whatever it may be, saying there is a vulnerability with this application. Here is the patch or the file that you need to use, that you need to download in order to fix the vulnerability we've identified with this application. The problem is, when application developers identify this, they often also put that same bulletin up on the web somewhere for all of their customers to be able to see it. And of course, who else is seeing it? All of the bad guys, right? And so if the bad guys find that vulnerability, they then search for companies that are using that type of application. Maybe it's a type of server, whatever it may be, and then they take advantage of that to get into a company system and then launch the ransomware attack that way. So those are the ways in which these ransomware attacks often happen. Let's talk now a little bit about the anatomy of a ransomware attack, right? So this is what you can expect when a ransomware attack occurs. What is it that you're going to be seeing from step by step? So the first part of it is detection. This is where your IT department has seen certain alerts. You are starting to see certain files become encrypted. There's unusual behavior in your network. You've detected that there is some sort of a problem. So once there's been detection, the next phase is you have to mobilize your incident response team. The incident response team are the people who are going to help the company respond to the incident. These are the people you've identified as being your leaders in helping you respond. They include, you're not just your IT and information security folks, they may include somebody from your legal department. They often include somebody from operational perspective, somebody from finance, and somebody from HR. Also somebody from corporate communications, because all of those issues come up in responding to a ransomware attack. So you're mobilizing that team. Your company should have an incident response plan. That's a really, really important document. An incident response plan it's not long, it's usually just a few pages, but it's something that regulators always ask for, and it's something that's really helpful for you because it tells you that if you suffer any certain kind of incident, these are the people that need to be involved. This is how you're going to contact them. If email is down, here is their backup contact information. Here are the vendors that we have identified that we want to use if there is an incident. And so you've engaged them now, so you're not wasting time later. Here's the information about our insurance, so you can contact your cyber insurer in order to make sure that you're getting coverage. All of these things are part of your incident response plan, and you're building it in. The next thing you want to do is engage your breach coach. That's usually outside counsel. The breach coach is the one who moves everything along. because you're going to have to start performing forensics, which is the next phase, engagement of a forensic investigation. Forensics is where you bring in an expert to help you figure out, okay, how did this ransomware attack happen in the first place? How do we respond to it? How do we contain the threat? What should we be doing in order to eliminate it? That's what your forensic firm's doing. They're also looking to see what files may have been taken by the bad guys when they were in your system. That's all part of the forensic investigation. The next is really interesting. It's the negotiation and potentially the payment of a ransom. And there are firms out there. There's one in particular that does a lot of this work for companies when you've had a ransomware attack. Because what will happen for you is you'll get a ransom note from these threat actors once they've, once the ransom bomb has exploded. Part of that bomb includes a note that you will find. There may be many notes in there, and those notes tell you you are a victim of XYZ ransomware. In order for you to have access to your data, you have to pay us a certain amount of money. You can pay that money by going to this website, and so you ultimately then use that in order to start paying the threat actors in order to get access to your data back. So you've got this potential engagement of a third party in order to negotiate the amount that needs to be paid. Ultimately, you may need to pay the threat actors, and you may make that decision to pay based on the fact that you have you need that data. It could be that you have a backup program in place, but the backup may not be secure. And so if you can't restore from backup, the only way to get your data back is by paying the ransom. And so you use these threat actor negotiation firms in order to pay the ransom. Then you're also potentially engaging a public relations firm to help you respond to inquiries from customers or clients about the incident. You are engaging a mailing or call center if you need to notify customers, a significant number of customers, about the incident that has occurred. You're making disclosures to individuals whose personal information has been impacted, and you may even need to notify regulators of the incident as well to let them know, that this has happened to your organization. Again, this is where you're working with counsel to figure those sort of things out. And then if that's not enough for you, on top of all of this, potentially you also see a litigation or class action lawsuits that arise as a result of the incident. And so, that's another instance where, again, you're getting hit with additional penalties as a result of this incident. When you send out notice these days, it's often the case that in response to you sending out the notice, there is a class action lawsuit that's filed against you within a matter of days of making the announcement. The plaintiff's lawyers are falling over each other left and right to race to the courthouse to be the first one to sue you for the incident that you've suffered. They'll allege that you didn't adopt reasonable security safeguards to prevent this from happening. These are all things that you can expect, as this happens and as it goes forward. I'm seeing a comment about the wrong slide. I'm not sure which one you guys are looking at, but let me make sure that at least on my screen, they are both the same. So let's move to common questions. Here are some of the questions that we see when companies respond to a cybersecurity incident, right? When they're responding to a ransomware attack. Here are some of the common questions that we get from clients. So one question that often comes up is, why would we even pay these bad guys? And are we allowed to pay? And the answer is you pay them because you may not be able to get your data back, number one. If your backup has been, let me take a step back. When a ransomware attack happens, it impacts your network, and then potentially, if there is a connection between your network and your backup, it could also impact your backup system. And so if your backup system is down, the ransomware attack happens, everything's encrypted. When if you wipe everything out, you're not gonna be able to restore it with anything because your backup's been impacted. So you may need to pay in order to get the decryption key to unlock the backup data and to restore you to where you were. The other reason why you may need to pay is because the threat actors are claiming that they are going to notify, or they're going to release the data they've stolen. They're going to put it out on the dark web, and they want you to pay money in order to prevent them from doing that. So, you've got to potentially pay a ransom to prevent that. And I know it's easy for people to think, well, we would never do that. That's not something that our organization would support. But imagine all your confidential information has been impacted, or your customers' personal information, or whatever information about your customers has also been impacted and stolen, and the bad guys are threatening to release it. It's a very good chance that you're going to end up having to pay in order to prevent the distribution of that data out on the dark web. Now, to the question of, are you even allowed to pay? The answer is usually yes.
Hey, Al, we're seeing two screens. I think you just need to hit open that. Sorry.
Is that panel?
Yeah, I think you have two screens open. Just need to enhance the one with the slides, I believe. We see nothing right now.
Let's see. Oops. Are you seeing anything now? You see the slide there or nothing? How's that?
That's good. Now we need to move that into presenter view. We can see the panel.
You can see that, Ashley?
Yes, we can. Comment questions. We just need to enlarge that into presenter view.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm going to keep it in this because apparently moving it into presenter view seems to be causing some issues. I mean, I'll try this. Is that any better?
That's perfect right there. Yep.
Okay, great. So in terms of are you allowed to pay? The question then is, what are your legal restrictions in terms of being able to pay? The legal restriction is that you're not allowed to pay any threat actor that is on the Department of Treasury's list of specially designated nationals. This is a list of terrorist organizations all around the world. If the threat actors are on that list, then paying them opens you up potentially to civil penalties and also criminal penalties. So again, in order to pay, you're probably working with a professional third party in this space, both legal counsel and also a threat actor negotiation firm. And they will, before you pay, perform what's called an OFAC check. That is where you search OFAC's list of the specially designated nationals to make sure that the bad guys and the bit wallet to whom you would be sending payment are not on the list of specially designated nationals. Individually, you can't pay. There's been some recent guidance on this. So, if it's where I think we're seeing a trend that Department of Treasury is trying to crack down more on the payment of ransoms to these third parties. So it's definitely an area to watch and make sure you're working with counsel so you don't get yourself into civil or criminal trouble as a result of paying a ransom. Now, the question that often comes up, excuse me for a second. The question that often comes up is, how can you be sure that if you pay these guys, you're going to actually get what you're paying for? And look, there's no guarantee, but I can tell you in the more than 100 cases that we've worked on that are ransomware matters, there's only been one instance where the client did not get either the decryption key or a commitment to not distribute the data further. Now, on the decryption key, you may get the key and it will probably decrypt 95% of the data, but not all of it. So you have to keep that in mind. On the promise not to distribute further, you never know, right? At the end of the day, they could be distributing it, but you can also get something called dark web monitoring, so that after you've paid these bad guys, there is a third-party company that's out there searching the dark web, looking for your information to make sure that these bad guys didn't then, release it later on. And you engage them for 6 months or a year or whatever it may be to continue this search, so that you can be sure, or as sure as you can be, that the information hasn't been released and it's not out there. Now, I will tell you that there's one story where we had a client that suffered a ransomware attack, needed to pay the threat actor in order to get the decryption key because they didn't have it. Their backup was impacted as well. They paid the threat actor, and then the threat actor said, okay, now we want more money before we send you the decryption key. And the third-party threat actor negotiation firm that we worked with does this sort of thing all the time, is in this business all the time. So they reached out to other threat actor organizations and said to them, look, if you guys ever want to get paid in any of these ransomware incidents, you need to make sure that your buddy over here is committing to what he agreed to, because your whole business model relies on doing what you promise. And if that falls apart, nobody is ever going to pay you. And it sounds crazy, but strangely enough, within about a day or two, the guys who were demanding more money backed down and ended up sending the decryption key. It's really sort of an odd world in terms of what we're seeing out there, but that's just an example. The other thing to watch is, or a question that often comes up, is whether you need to involve law enforcement in responding to this. The answer is yes, you should involve law enforcement. It's not legally required. You don't absolutely have to do it, but it is a good idea for a few reasons. Number one, because in order for you if data has been impacted as a result of the ransomware incident, if personal information has been impacted, then you need to send notice to those individuals letting them know. And that notice has to state whether you contacted law enforcement or not in many jurisdictions. And so you don't want to be in a position where you're saying you didn't contact law enforcement. Reason number two is if you have insurance and you're seeking reimbursement of a ransom, the insurance company will often require that you have contacted law enforcement about the incident before they will reimburse you for the payment of any ransom. And then, reason number three is it's a good idea, it's for the public good. I think it's something that your clients expect, and I think you want to develop good relationships with law enforcement. In terms of the kind of costs that you can be expected to incur as a result of a ransomware attack, you're looking at, for sure, the forensic costs. That's anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000. That's the forensic company that's doing their investigation. You have legal costs that are probably going to be in the neighborhood of $30,000 to $50,000 to give you guidance on your legal obligations, prepare your notification letters, work with regulators, all of those sorts of things. You have a data restoration firm that will help you restore your backup data for you. That's another anywhere $30,000 to $50,000 there. You have a public relations firm potentially that might help you in preparing press releases and communications about the incident. That's going to be another, you're looking at another $50,000 to $100,000 potentially there. So you see all these costs really adding up. But the big one in all of this is the ransom payment. If you need to make a ransom payment, typically you're looking at 6 figures. I mean, there are some smaller ones and maybe you're hit with one of those, but usually you're looking in the neighborhood of 6 figures, maybe even 7 figures in terms of paying the ransom. And so that I'm saying all of this because it's a really good reason as to why you need to make sure you have cyber insurance, and not just cyber insurance, but a policy that will cover for cyber extortion. So cyber insurance can cover for your things like your first party claims, like anything that happens to you where you have to respond, hiring, all of those things, the forensics, the restoration firm, the law firm, the public relations, it covers all of that. But you need oftentimes a special kind of rider or addition to your policy to include cyber extortion, which is the ability to pay these bad guys the ransom if you end up needing to do that. So think about that, as you're going through your policy renewal to make sure that you've got sufficient coverage there. There are increasing litigation and regulatory enforcement risks as a result of a ransomware incident. These days, it's quite common to face a class action lawsuit after a ransomware event because ransomware events are, things that it's like sexy for the news, right? Like they want to be able to talk about that sort of stuff. So when it's out there in the public, plaintiffs' lawyers will see it. Plaintiffs' lawyers then they shoot first and ask questions second. They will just file the lawsuit and then they're looking for a quick settlement to get out of it. But that quick settlement is not cheap. They're looking at usually in the neighborhood of 6 figures in order to resolve it. If you've notified individuals of the incident, then then your notification is sometimes posted on regulatory websites. So let's say, for example, that you are a covered entity or business associate under HIPAA. You would notify OCR. OCR puts it on their website. Similarly, if you notify someone in a regulator in California, California has a website with their Attorney General's office where they put all of the breach notices up there that they receive. And it's available for anyone in the public. And plaintiffs' lawyers will often troll these websites looking to figure out, whose information is there, who's just suffered a data incident so that they can then bring a class action lawsuit against you. So it's a really big risk. There are now increasing regulatory risks too. You notify a regulator because of a data breach notification law that you've suffered a ransomware attack, and they will oftentimes reach out with more questions. And if they determine that you lacked reasonable security safeguards to prevent this incident from happening in the first place, they can bring an enforcement action against you for violating different state data security or unfair and deceptive trade practice laws. There's, we talked a little bit already about cyber insurance and does it cover the cost, so I won't cover that again. But then comes the question of, how do you mitigate these risks and what are some of the steps that you can be taking in order to avoid these things from happening? We'll talk about that, as I kind of conclude this area, but here's some of the lawsuits that you're seeing. So you could face lawsuits potentially from consumers whose information has been impacted as a result of the ransomware attack. Their information may have been stolen, or it could have been otherwise accessed by the threat actors, and you send out notice about it, and then of course they file the lawsuit in response to that. You're facing potentially shareholder derivative lawsuits, where this is, you're a publicly traded company, and they file a lawsuit against your organization, claiming that your board didn't do a sufficient job of identifying these risks and minimizing them. You could face lawsuits by business partners, where a business partner decides that they are going to sue you because their sensitive business information was impacted as a result of a ransomware attack. These are all potential risks that arise from a ransomware attack in the area of litigation. So you want to make sure, going back to the cyber insurance, that your insurance policy includes coverage for any sort of third-party claims, lawsuits against you. Regulatory risks as well. I talked a little bit about this, but the SEC has brought some enforcement actions. State AGs are bringing enforcement actions. And what these enforcement actions are claiming is that you failed to adopt reasonable security guards to prevent the ransomware event from happening. Like, for example, you didn't use multi-factor authentication or encryption. You didn't have the right policies and processes in place to respond to the incident. You said something about the incident that was misleading. These are all of all examples of the basis for which a regulatory enforcement action can be brought against your organization as a result of an incident. So I kind of want to sort of wrap it up in this area, and then we'll see if there are any questions out there. But this is really, I think, if you were to say to me, okay, what's the one slide, you know, the one thing I need to take back to my organization, I would say this is it. Okay, so this slide lays out all of the different ways in which your organization should be preparing for a ransomware incident. And if you do these things, you will be at a much lower risk of suffering a ransomware attack. So the first one is a contract provision or an addendum that relates to a data breach. What I'm talking about there is a provision with your vendor, right? So your vendor suffers a data breach. You want to have the ability to make the vendor provide you with information about the breach, give you, cooperate in letting you know if customers have been impacted, provide you a copy of a third-party report verifying that the incident occurred and what the impact was, and indemnify you if you have costs that you have to incur because of the vendor's data breach. And what I'm talking about with the vendor breaches is a situation where the vendor has a data breach that impacts your business information or your customer's information. And you now have to send notice to your business partners or to customers saying their stuff was impacted as a result of this vendor's breach. You want to make sure you're in the driver's seat in terms of controlling how this is going to be managed. You can only do that if you have one of these provisions in place. So you got to make sure you've got that built into your provision, your contract with your vendor. Now we're going to talk about something more technical, which is multi-factor authentication, encryption, and endpoint detection and response. So multi-factor authentication is, okay, so you can authenticate yourself in different ways. You can do it with what you know, and an example of that would be a password. You can do it with what with who you are. So that could be like Face ID, biometrics. When you use your iPhone, you turn on your iPhone with your finger or with the Face ID. That's all biometrics. That's who you are. You can also identify yourself with something that you have, and something that you have might be your phone, right? So if you've ever had to log in somewhere and they say, okay, we've now sent a code to your phone, let us know what that code is, and then we'll let you in, then that's something that you have. So multi-factor authentication requires you to use at least two of those three things for you to get access into, an application or whatever it may be to log in. The reason that's important is because oftentimes organizations just use one of those things. Let's say, for example, what you know, like your password. And so take a step back, there are data breaches all the time. And as a result of these data breaches, let's take me, for example, I may shop on a certain company's website. I use my email address, I use password, and chances are I use that email and password for a lot of different companies and a lot of different reasons. That's not good. I would never recommend that people do that, but it's just life, right? It happens. People do that. And so let's say that company suffers a data breach, and now Al's username and password is stolen. Those bad guys can purchase that data on the dark web. They will then take that data they've stolen and start applying it and using it with other companies to see, is Al using this with this bank? Is Al using it? And it's not just Al, they've got hundreds or thousands of individuals whose credentials are part of this. And they're trying to apply it everywhere that they can to see where do they get a hit, where can they get in and then steal more information. That can be totally eliminated as a risk if you have multi-factor authentication, because the bad guy, let's say, takes that stolen information, tries to log in, but then they are asked the question of, okay, what's the code that was just sent to your phone? Well, they don't have my phone. I have my phone. So, there's no way to get in. Multi-factor authentication is the #1 security measure every company should be using. It's not hard. It's not expensive. You got to do it. If you don't do it, you're borderline negligent these days. So you've got to make sure you're asking your IT and information security team, are we doing that? #2 is encryption. Encryption is for a good reason, right? We talked about encryption for a bad reason with a ransomware attack, but you should encrypt sensitive data and personally identifiable information. Why? Because if a bad guy steals your stuff, but the stuff he steals is encrypted, that's not even considered a data breach under the law. If personally identifiable information is encrypted and the threat actor doesn't also get the key to decrypt your personally identifiable information, then that's not a breach. Doesn't require notice. It poses no security risk to the individuals whose information is encrypted. And then the last thing is endpoint detection and response. This is a monitoring tool. There are some really good ones. One of them is called Sentinel-1. It's a monitoring tool is out there looking at your entire network, looking for suspicious behavior, looking for anything that would require an alert to you of, hey, something's not looking right with this endpoint, it's acting weirdly, or we've identified malware on it, whatever it may be. And this is bringing this to your attention immediately. So going back to our story of how ransomware attacks happen, when the bad guy has that vulnerability and first steps foot in your house, it's like an alarm in your house that goes off and says to you, hey, there's someone in your house right now, or there might be someone in your house, go check it out. So you've got to have one of these tools. If you do those three things, there is like a 95% chance. I mean, it's never 100% because you never know, but it's a 95% chance you're not going to suffer a ransomware attack or any sort of significant data breach, assuming you're doing these things and you're doing them correctly. The other thing to think about is data minimization. Data minimization means that you are not collecting stuff that you don't need. I can't tell you how many clients suffer data breaches and then realize that the stuff that was stolen, which is sensitive, wasn't even really anything that they needed anymore, but they just kept it because they keep everything. And you are just creating more of a risk for yourself in keeping stuff that you no longer need where that stuff is sensitive. So you got to eliminate that. Next is air-gapped backup solution. So this is just a fancy way of saying a secure backup. Air-gapped means there is a gap of air between your backup and the rest of your system. So if the bad guy gets in your system, there is no way to get over to the backup. So he can do whatever he wants in your system, and you just wipe it all clean, and then you use the backup to restore it. That's why, and that eliminates needing to pay these threat actors for a decryption key. So that's really important too. The next on the list is a third-party risk assessment. This is where you hire a professional firm like a Mandiant or Silent here in Florida. They're based in St. Pete. They're really good as well. Or CrowdStrike, whoever it may be, to come in and evaluate your environment and tell you, here are the problems that you're facing. Here are all the windows that are open. Here are the doors that are unlocked in your organization. And now let us tell you how to prioritize addressing which of these in which order. That's really important for you because you've got a budget, what you can spend on information security in IT. And you may not even know, like, what are the open windows and open doors in your house. So doing this helps you figure all that out. Another thing is an incident response plan. Having that plan. We talked about this already, so I won't mention it again, but you got to have that plan in place to help you respond to an incident. Doing a tabletop exercise. A tabletop exercise is where you simulate a ransomware attack and you go through the process of, okay, day one, our stuff has been, an employee comes into work, sees everything's been encrypted. What do we do at this point? Okay, day two, everyone's stuff has been encrypted. Day three, the threat actors are asking for $1 million. Like you're just kind of working through it with your incident response team to figure out how would you respond if this thing actually happened to you. Another thing to do is executive or board training. Because you want to make sure that those in the highest position of leadership really get this that this is a significant risk and are appropriating a right amount of resources for your organization to be able to respond to a ransomware or any kind of data breach or cyber attack if necessary. Talked about cyber insurance. Obviously, the fact that this is the third time tells you it's super important. And then out-of-band confirmation for wire transfers. This kind of relates to multi-factor authentication, and it's not a ransomware thing, but how many times have you seen fraudulent wire transfers take place because a threat actor was pretending to be someone that they weren't? Maybe they break into one of your vendor's accounts because the vendor didn't use multi-factor authentication. So all that threat actor needed was the password and username. They got in, and then they ended up sending you an email asking you to wire money. You thought it was actually coming from the vendor legitimately, but because you didn't use an out-of-band confirmation, meaning because you didn't pick up the phone and call them about this email, you went ahead and sent the wire transfer. So that's another way in which you can really kind of minimize this kind of risk from happening. that is, those are all the thoughts that I had on this subject. I'm happy to just take a look real quick, see if there's anything in the questions.
Alice, Dan, I got a good question for you. I think I asked
Yeah, sure.
conference
Yep.
in Fort Lauderdale. Are you seeing a lot of restaurants, hotels getting into this situation or having this problem with ransomware?
Am I seeing hotels and restaurants?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, I am. And oftentimes, like one of our clients is a franchise, and it impacted a number of the franchisees as a result of the ransomware attack, and it was a big mess for them. Look, what you're seeing in the news, I will just say this: what you're seeing on the news and what's publicly available is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many of these attacks going on that you don't hear about. And many payments going to these threat actors that you don't hear about. But any company that is internet facing, meaning they've got like something on the internet in some way or a network that's connected to the internet, is susceptible to this kind of an attack. So for sure, it's absolutely happening.
The reason I'm saying that is it seems I'm very disappointed in the number of folks that attended this webinar. Maybe I'm just sensitive to it, but it seems like it's just something they just say, no, it's not going to happen to me, and all of a sudden it's a big surprise, or they just what's your take on that? I'm confused why it's not more prevalent.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it can be a combination of reasons. It may be a feeling like, well, we got an IT department, we've got an information security group, they're on it. I'm sure they're thinking about this. That's what we pay them money to do. I don't have to think about that. And that's obviously not a good approach, because potentially the entire organization can suffer a significant impact as a result of something like a ransomware attack. Operationally, you can be down for days or weeks. Because like restoring from backup is not a process that takes a few hours, like like your iPhone. It takes days. I've seen it take weeks for companies to get back up. So there may be a feeling like someone else has got it. It may be a feeling of this isn't going to happen to us. We're good. We've already been monitoring this. It's something that only happens in movies, but I assure you it doesn't. And I will tell you that probably 60% of my clients are small businesses that are referred to me from insurance companies because they're an insured and we're on the insurance company's panel. And when I see those companies get hit with this, man, do I feel bad, because they have none of this stuff in place, and they are usually having to pay a ransom 8 or 9 times out of 10. So, yeah.
Great stuff, by the way. It's very informative. And love
Yeah,
the way,
no, my pleasure. Sorry about any sort of technical issues that were happening there, but yeah.
the way you simplify it, make it real easy to understand was great. Anyone else have any questions or chat? Ashley, do you see anything in there?
I don't see anything else. I think that Al has another obligation after this. So if we don't have anything else, we can share Al's information that people can follow up with after as well.
Yeah, I think we'll blast this out to our members and have them look at it. A lot of folks these days are listening to the webinars offline, or sometimes this isn't the best time. So great stuff. Appreciate the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. And anybody, if you have any questions, you got my email address on the screen. Feel free to shoot me an email. And thanks again. Love working with you guys at FRLA. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Al. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yep.